Hello, my lovely listeners. I'm Dr. Mary Barson.
And I'm Dr. Lucy Burns. Welcome to this episode of Real Health and Weight Loss.
Hello, lovely listeners. Dr. Mary here, and I am joined today by the fabulous Dr. Lucy. Dr. Lucy, tell me something interesting that has gone on for you this week.
Well, I was just sneakily getting my microphone ready because I suddenly thought, oh my God, it's on the other side of the table. That's no good. So something interesting this week. Well, interestingly, I discovered that one of our little doggies so we've got two white fluffies, they're about 12, and they do love snuggling up in winter, but I've also realised that one of them is snuggling up because she's a little bit sore in her back legs. So I hadn't realised that she's, as dogs do, they get older, and the way she's managing herself is to just reduce her movement. And I just thought, oh, she's just snuggling, but actually she's snuggling because it's more painful for her to move, which I would like to lay claim for credit, but I haven't. My vet studying daughter has pointed this out to me and then proceeded to demonstrate with a very good hip examination of a dog, to which she nearly got bitten. So
oh, far out.
I know. So now we're in the process of just changing things up for the little doggy to make her more comfortable.
Oh, poor little love. I do hope that you are successful in your aims there. Oh,
I know.
Poor love.
Yes. What about you, Maz? What good things happened to you or interesting things have happened to you this week?
Well, in October last year, I think it was October, we had a fire in our shed. And it was bad, but we put it out, and that was because we were all the solar panel and the inverter and rats chewing wires and all these horrible things. And the upshot of that is that the insurance company is paying for a new shed, and they came along today, not the insurance company, but people who know what they're doing, and dug a really big hole. So we've got the excavators have just dug this big hole, and with the rain and winter and mud, there's just this wonderful, enormous, amazing pile of muddy dirt and this huge hole, which my kids have been loving. And we've been having more baths than we would usually need to because of the mud.
Indeed. There's a bit of me that's going, oh, big hole in the ground. It's like a swimming pool.
Yeah,
very good. Good for the cold water swimming. The colder the better. All right, darling. So I thought we'd have another little chat about lipedema today, given June is Lipedema Awareness Month. And I thought it's something that does affect a lot of women in particular. So it's time for a little chitty chat about it.
Let's do it. Such an important topic, and I think an often overlooked topic, which is no good. We're going to bring it out to the light of day.
Yes. Overlooked, misunderstood, and plenty of myth busting today.
Yes, absolutely. We're going to shine a light on lipedema. Let's do it.
Indeed. So the first thing is that you may know that I'm pronouncing it, and you are too, Mez, lipoedema, like liposuction, as opposed to lipedema, which, you're perfectly entitled to pronounce it like that if you like, but it can be a bit confusing because lipedema sounds quite a lot like lymphedema, and there's completely separate conditions. And it can also sound like lipidemia, which is a type of fat in the blood. So emia is blood, and lipid's fat. Lipid's the fat. So lipedema is what I think we're referring it to.
Yeah, I think that there's a good little, has that clarified that point. Good job.
Indeed. So one of the things that, and it's interesting because I didn't learn anything about lipedema in my medical training, and I suspect you didn't either.
Mm-mm.
And for a lot of people, they just think they're fat. That's really that, and people have told them for decades, you're just fat, just lose some weight.
Yeah, it is tricky. It's not the same as being overweight or obese. Lipedema is not obesity. Sometimes they can occur together. People can be overweight and have lipedema, but people can also be normal weight and have lipedema. So they're not the same. They are different, and it's quite a specific condition relating to the accumulation and deposition of fat in the body. And it is a condition where it's chronic, like sort of long-term condition where people get these sort of symmetrical accumulations of fat under the skin with combined inflammation and edema, like fluid in the tissues, that can create, all kinds of problems. And sometimes this abnormal fat accumulation can be quite significant indeed and can really hamper people's function. And the treatment, there are treatment options out there, but people need to be made aware of it in the first stage, else, they can't seek appropriate treatments.
Correct. So if you look under a microscope, the fat cells of lipedema affected tissue are completely different to the fat cells in obesity affected tissue. So there's certainly in lipedema, there is certainly more fat cells. So the fancy name for fat cells is adipocytes. So there are more of those and they're bigger, which is similar to the obesity side of things. But it's also the tissue between the fat cells that's affected. So there's interstitial fluid. So interstitial again means fluid that's outside blood vessels. So the connective tissue, the little sort of, if you imagine like a web of tissue, fine tissue that's joining all these cells together, there's a problem with that. And what it is that we think the blood vessels within that tissue become leaky. And so they leak fluid into the interconnective tissue so that the tissue between the cells is also swollen. That's the edema bit of it. And it accumulates these proteins. And then those proteins form a bit like a gelatinous kind of mass. And then over time they can scar and become fibrosed so that people with lipedema end up with really lumpy, often painful fatty tissue.
Yes. And it gets inflamed as well. So the inflammation is this bit of a chicken and egg process going on there, but the dysfunction of these fat cells in this altered environment creates low-grade inflammation, which can then also cause increased leakiness of the blood vessels and increased pain and increased fluid, and that can get a bit of an unpleasant cycle going on there. But inflammation is a key hallmark of lipedema and also presents us with one of the levers that we can use to treat it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So one of the myths around lipedema, so the first thing I think to recognise is that standard calorie restriction, i.e. dieting, doesn't work for lipedema. But Mez, we would also hazard that it doesn't actually work for any forms of overweight or any forms of fat.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't work. But what happens is that many women for decades have been told, lose weight, go on a diet. So they will, and they spend eons with calorie restriction to the point where they can actually be quite malnourished and emaciated and very, very thin in the top half and still have lipedema affected hips, bottom and legs, and so therefore be bigger in the bottom half.
That's right. And lipedema does more often affect the lower half of the body, not exclusively, but more often. And we also didn't mention that it affects women far more commonly than men because estrogen and estrogen receptors in the fat tissue play a significant role in its development. And yes, back to the myth busting, it is not same as obesity, and dieting doesn't work. It's not caused by overeating and not moving enough, and it is not treated by dieting and increasing your exercise to reduce, to get more calories out than you're putting back in.
Yes, it will not respond to under-eating and over-exercising.
It won't. Thank you. That was a little bit more articulate. I've still got a cold, people.
We forgive you. We forgive you. It's fine. So, yes, you're right. Absolutely. It has nothing to do with excessive energy acquisition. So, most of the time fat will come when we've got more energy and we don't know where to put it, so we store it in our fat tissue. Lipedema's got nothing to do with that. As Dr. Mary said, it is mainly women. In fact, would be exclusively women, except that there are some men who have some estrogen-related conditions. And interestingly, men who have significant obesity, estrogen is made in our fat cells, whether you're a man or a woman. So men with obesity can have raised levels of estrogen, which can therefore precipitate lipedema in susceptible people. There is most definitely a genetic link, but sadly it's not just one gene. If it was just, one gene, there may be some sort of fresh hope for gene therapy, but they've identified dozens of genes. So we know that it's genetic, but there's not a genetic cure on the horizon.
Yeah. It's, as with many things, it's a bit more complicated than that.
Indeed.
What do you reckon would be another myth about lipedema that would be worth busting right now?
That you can't do anything about it. So some people have this idea there's nothing you can do, just like it or lump it, which, if you have lipedema, you will know well and truly about lumping.
Yes, absolutely. So I think that would be a beautiful time now to talk about, what are some of the effective management strategies, things that people can do to help treat this condition and help improve their health and quality of life?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of broad umbrellas that we would put it under. So the first umbrella would be looking at all the things that we can do to improve our inflammatory load. So all humans have some levels of inflammation, some more than others, and we do lots of things to ourselves to worsen those. So the first thing would be looking at what can we do to improve inflammatory load. The second thing is looking at what can we do to reduce the amount of fluid in those interstitial spaces. So the area between the fat cells, again, what we almost want to do is sort of squeeze the fluid out, because we know that the longer the fluid stays there, the more inflammatory it gets, the more it scars. So we've got the therapies that revolve around that. In fact, I can't remember how many umbrellas I said there were, but I'm going to come up with 4. The third umbrella is there are some surgical options, and we'll talk a bit about those. But the fourth umbrella, and this is probably the hardest one I would say for people to learn, is self-compassion and self-acceptance. And that is hard when we have a society that is so obsessed with aesthetic perfection, and that certainly women with lipedema often feel so far away from that ideal.
And especially this, our cultural obsession with thinness and this idea, particularly the incorrect idea that lipedema, it's just fat, just burn it off, just eat less, just move more, because that is not what lipedema is. It's not just fat. It's a more complex condition than that. So unlearning those messages that this is your fault, that there should be an easy cure, but I can't find an easy cure, therefore there's something wrong with me, I think is extremely important, because I believe that you can be very beautiful and have a wonderful life with lipedema, and that there are definitely things you can do to manage and reduce the lipedema that would help improve your function and your quality of life, and sure, improve your aesthetics as well. But you don't need to wait till some magical time in the future when your lipedema is completely under control to be worthy, happy, and living your best life.
Indeed. So if we look at the first umbrella of inflammation, Mez, this is one of your genius zones. You love looking at anti-inflammatory lifestyle effects.
I do.
What have you got for us?
So, yes, anything that we can do to reduce our overall, inflammatory milieu within our bodies is going to be really helpful for lipedema. It's one of those umbrellas. So things that can be extremely useful is eating real food. That's a great place to start. Whole, real, unprocessed foods is a great place to start. And if you then want to kick it up a notch, lipedema is one of the conditions for which a ketogenic diet can be quite useful because of the anti-inflammatory effects of the ketone bodies. So ketone bodies, when we follow a ketogenic diet, when we're eating a diet that is low enough in carbohydrates that our body naturally starts making more ketones, then these ketones, our body uses them for fuel instead of glucose. These ketone bodies have a potent anti-inflammatory effect. And they are anti-inflammatory within themselves, and they also probably reduce the production of other inflammatory mediators like cytokines within our bodies. And if you're eating real food, ketogenic diet, so, you know, a ketogenic diet could be nothing but canola oil and whey protein. Like, you could do that and you would be in nutritional ketosis. I don't recommend it, but you would be. However, that's a very processed and pro-inflammatory diet. But if you're eating real whole food, and in addition to that, keeping your sugar and starch intake quite low so that your body's naturally in nutritional ketosis, it's like a powerful double punch, 1-2, to really knock inflammation down in your body. And it has other flow-on effects as well. It's useful for our gut microbiome. And if we're eating real foods, we're going to improve our omega-3 intake of our lovely omega-3 fatty acids, which are anti-inflammatory. And also really pay attention to your stress management and to your sleep. And you do all of these things and you can very powerfully reduce your inflammation.
Absolutely. And I'm going to just emphasize that sleep is like a secret weapon. It is people who have chronic sleep deprivation, and a lot of us, you can survive on 6 hours a night. Some people, and it's very, very few, are okay on that. But the majority of us, 6 hours a night is not enough long term. Now, of course, we all have seasons. You, Dr. Mary, have a young baby.
Yeah, I know. I get a bit sad when people talk about this. I'm like, oh.
I know. But it is not something that you're planning to do for the rest of your life, 6 hours a night. And look, I certainly got 6 hours a night for a long, long time, not realizing exactly how I was depriving my body of just valuable, nourishing rest that you get for free with these amazing benefits that I just thought, And now, of course, I'm very keen on getting at least 7.5, usually 8 hours a night, which I would get most nights. And like everything in life, it doesn't have to be every single night, but if you can do it most of the time, then you're doing pretty well. The other one I know that you're big on is sitting as a pro-inflammatory state. So again, it's tricky with lipedema because prolonged standing is painful as you can accumulate fluid in your legs. But I think the idea of mixing up sitting and standing can be really helpful for reducing that inflammatory load that comes with prolonged sitting.
Yeah, our bodies love movement. They do. And yes, you don't need to stand all the time. You don't need to lie. But mixing it up and moving around, even just like small amounts of incidental movement, really do make a significant difference to our inflammatory milieu, to use that term again. And definitely it's great to go out and do exercise and strength training and to really, work on your fitness and your strength. That is also a different to increasing your movement. Staying still for a long period of time is pro-inflammatory. Getting up and moving around frequently is anti-inflammatory. It's just how human biochemistry works.
Indeed. Now I get it. I know for some women with lipedema, particularly if it's advanced, movement can be difficult. One of the things that is really helpful, and again, I know that it can be tricky, that is hydrotherapy or swimming. Swimming's so good for people with lipedema because it creates this hydrostatic pressure, which is all about reducing that fluid in between the cells. So it's like wearing a compression garment all the time while you're in the pool. Obviously, you can move without the stress on your joints, but I do understand that for some women it's very confronting to get into a pool when they really don't like perhaps the way they look.
Yeah. That is where that self-compassion and working on your beautiful mind can be helpful to reframe and flip those thoughts. And look, that can take time. If you're not there right now, there is absolutely no reason to feel shame or guilt about that, but you could work towards loving yourself as you are and getting out there and moving and doing the things that are good for your health and that bring you joy, regardless of whether or not you conform to some ideal aesthetic or not.
Indeed, indeed. So then we, I guess, moving on from the hydrostatic pressure, there are other ways to improve the fluid or to reduce the fluid between the fat cells. So one of these is compression garments. And this is not just, look, again, it's
Spanx.
yeah, it's not just your Spanx, no.
No.
And it depends a little bit on, again, what level of lipedema that you're at. But certainly in early stages, you can just wear lightweight compression garments, which I actually wear. I don't have lipedema, but I have some venous insufficiency, which means my ankles, feet swell, particularly because I do spend a lot of time sitting. And so I wear these just, I mean, they're actually quite comfortable once you're on because your ankles come back. But there's plenty of garments available. You can get some that are off the shelf or you can get custom fitted ones. Custom fitted ones are obviously more expensive, but they do potentially fit you better. And there are people whose jobs out there, that's all they do. They design and fit garments for people with lipedema or lymphedema. So again, if you're worried that you're too big or they're going to judge you, they're not. They're absolutely not.
I've got another myth that I think we should address. Two myths. One is that it is cured by liposuction, and the other one is that, liposuction is a cop-out. So let's talk about liposuction, shall we?
Indeed. And I think it's a great topic to talk about because, there's been a lot of issues, around cosmetic surgery and particularly liposuction. It's not particularly well regulated. You don't need a lot of training to be able to set up and do liposuction. And there are plenty of people who have had liposuction and they don't have lipedema. They just want to get rid of, some fat on their hips or something like that. One of the things that's really important to recognize, though, is that lipedema is diseased fat tissue. It's not standard fat tissue. The capillaries in lipedema are very fragile. The lymphatics in lipedema are heavily involved and, again, very fragile tissue. If you damage your lymphatics through whatever mechanism, then it's lifelong consequences. So anybody that wants to get liposuction, please, I'm urging you, do not just go to some random person who says they know how to do liposuction. Absolutely go to someone who is qualified and deals with lipedema reasonably exclusively because there's a lot involved. So two things I would say. Certainly liposuction is not a cop-out. For many people with lipedema, it improves their function. So the fat distribution in lipedema can be really debilitating. It can be particularly on the inside of the legs, just above the knees. People can end up with these really large fat pads, which actually change their gait. They end up waddling. They end up with that chronic waddling, end up with osteoarthritis of their hips and become really, really hard for them to move. So for a lot of people, having liposuction is function preserving. Nothing to do with aesthetics, all to do with function. So it's certainly not a cop-out. But the second myth, I think, is that there are people out there who will tell you lipedema surgery is a cure. Now, that's assuming that we understand the cause of lipedema in the first place, and we don't. So the mechanism that causes lipedema is still there, whatever it is. So people will say, it came back because the surgeon didn't get all the lipedema-affected tissue. No, we don't actually know what causes lipedema to occur in the first place. So if we don't know the cause, we can't just treat it by getting rid of the currently affected tissue. The root cause is still there.
That's right. And you can't sort of have the surgeon turn around and say, well, you failed my lipedema liposuction. That's definitely, you can't fail it. It might not be the whole picture. It's not addressing that unknown root cause, but things that can and do, because we know that inflammation is involved, we know that lymphatics are involved. So that anti-inflammatory diet, those compressions, those ongoing things, those can really help it from coming back with a vengeance.
Absolutely. And look, I think what liposuction does is it's like tissue debulking. It does reduce an inflammatory load. So it can be helpful. But it's incredibly expensive, so people need to be aware of that, and it's not covered at all by Medicare. So for the majority of people who are having liposuction, if they need it, and as we just heard earlier, it's a symmetrical condition. So if you have it on one leg, you usually have it on the other leg, and it will cost somewhere between $30,000 and $50,000. So it's certainly a big investment for something that is not a cure, but certainly can improve function for those women that need their function improved, and it can reduce the progression. You know, it is certainly useful, but it's not the cure. So with that in mind, we need to therefore go to this fourth pillar, which is, of course, some form of making peace with your body. And I think when people who don't have lipedema tell other people to make peace with your body, that can feel a little insulting. And so I'm a woman who doesn't have lipedema.
I'm a woman who doesn't have lipedema.
But I'm certainly not bodily perfect.
I am not bodily perfect either.
No. And I don't function particularly well because I seem to have no muscles. So that's again, it's something I guess I've had to come to terms with, is this acceptance of my body, flaws and all. It doesn't always look good. It doesn't always look pretty. My bones and muscles don't look the way other people's do, but it is what it is. And what I do is try and do the maximum I can with what I've got. And that's what I would say to anybody who's got lipedema. If you can find it in yourself to just live your life to the most maximal funness that you can, without worrying whether everybody on the beach is looking at your cankles, then please do that, because honestly, the person who is most worried about how your body looks is you. You truly are, and I get that. But just find every day little ways to challenge yourself to be able to live your life with as much vitality as possible.
Yes. Our bodies are vehicles. They are not ornaments. And, you know, I love to celebrate my body for what it can do and not to hate it for what it can't do and not to hate it for how it looks.
No, poor old bodies. They're just trying to do their best. So summary for you lovelies, the pillars for looking after a body with lipedema. And honestly, it's roughly 10 to 11% of women have this disease. Not everyone's diagnosed. So, you know, that's close to 3 million people in Australia. So it's a lot. Well, actually, that's 3 million people. 10%, it's probably 1.5 million. I forgot that half our population's male.
Oh, so, yeah.
Yeah.
Them. Yeah, sorry, boys, you're very important too. Yeah.
Yes. So we do know real food, like a low-carb processed food diet is missing the point. Real food diet first, then reduce your carbs, and if you can, you know, attempt a ketogenic diet. There's scientific evidence that it's helpful. We know about compression, manual lymphatic drainage. We didn't talk too much about that, but you can do that. Whatever way, thinking about it, just squeezing out that fluid out of your interstitial space, whether it's swimming, whether it's wearing compression, whether it's having the pumps, whether it's going to a massage therapist, doing those is really helpful. Surgery as a tool but not a cure, and learning to love and accept yourself in the most way that you can. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to be completely loving on yourself, but what we want to do is not completely hate on ourselves either.
Yeah.
Good. Lovely peeps. If you think that you could have lipedema, we have a questionnaire that will help you. Again, it's not a diagnostic questionnaire, but it will help you decide whether you may or may not have it. In which case, if you may, then you can go down the path of getting a further diagnosis. And we also have a special package which we call the lipedema inflammation package, which of course goes through the processes of a low-carb real food diet with the option of doing a ketogenic diet, along with beautiful hypnosis for stress management and love and acceptance. The links for all of these will be in the show notes, or you can go to our website, rlmedicine.com. All right, lovelies, have a beautiful, gorgeous week. We'll see you next time.
See you, lovelies.
So, my lovely listeners, that ends this episode of Real Health and Weight Loss. I'm Dr. Lucy Burns.
And I'm Dr. Mary Barson. We're from Real Life Medicine. To contact us, please visit rlmedicine.com.
And until next time, thanks for listening.
The information shared on the Real Health and Weight Loss podcast, including show notes and links, provides general information only. It is not a substitute, nor is it intended to provide individualised medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment, nor can it be construed as such. Please consult your doctor for any medical concerns.